with these terms, things like narcissist, let's use narcissist then as an example. Tell us firstly, what is a narcissist?
I mean, yeah, I guess that's a question that I would kind of respond with like, it depends. Yeah. I mean, yeah, rather than, I think the temptation is to find some sort of definition, right? As to like, this is what you should spot. And then I would be falling into that same pattern. You know, I guess I would add before I answer that as well, that I did once hear somebody saying, you know, often the people who are busy doing the clinical work are not the people who have the time to propagate the messages on social media or aren't comfortable in doing so. So that also feeds into this kind of problem. I think for me, a lot of the time in society, people use the word narcissist when somebody has done something that seems selfish or hurtful to them. I mean, the origin of the word is in Greek mythology, in the story of Narcissus who fell in love with his own reflection and drowned. So it's kind of, you know, that story was a warning for people to not be too about yourself. For me, I understand, I think regardless of how somebody presents in society, whether that's in terms of their mental health, the way that their personality is, it's all understandable in the context of their early experiences. I don't think it forms through biology, and I don't think it forms without a sense of without making sense of early experiences in particular ways. So I would see narcissism as a defense against some sort of insecurity. I guess the question around, or maybe one of the challenges that people face when they describe somebody or they experience someone who they would describe as a narcissist, is that perhaps they could see that, well, you know, early on they had some challenging time, but the person refuses to accept that the context shaped their current experience. And that is a very powerful defense, the kind of like, I don't have a problem, you have a problem. And I think the grappling with that is really tough. And so I could see the temptation to fall back and just be like, classic narcissist. I was raised by a narcissist, you know, these people are narcissists, because it gives us permission to disconnect or to other. But I actually don't think that's for the betterment of anybody, really. It increases intolerance.
If someone that you recognize has a level of narcissistic tendency within their own personality, how might you as a therapist then start to work with them? And would someone come to, I mean, this is an interesting thing, would someone come to you and say, I'm a narcissist?
Sometimes people have come to meet with me and said that other people have said that they're a narcissist. But usually, sometimes I've worked with people where it feels like the narrative in our work is largely centered on their experiences, or it seems like there's some kind of filter, which means that they are kind of infallible and other people are more to blame. So there are elements of that which can be useful to kind of help somebody to identify. But there aren't many people who come and say I am a narcissist. In some ways that I guess would be seen as narcissistic in itself, right? Because it's like, you know what, but yeah, it's kind of, it's a complex thing to come up against. But in my mind, the manifestation of distress, as I mentioned, is always understandable in the context. And I think the challenge is to work with the person or the people around the person as well, if possible, to make sense of what it is and to move them to a different way of being in their lives, if that's what they want. I mean, some people don't want that. And I guess that, I suppose that's the challenge for people in society when they come up against people who they might describe as a narcissist. Usually they're more interested in themselves, their experiences, they're less likely to take responsibility, and they don't really want to do anything about it.
Because I suppose it's more common for someone to come in and say, my friend or my family member or my partner is a narcissist. And then at that point, you're helping them navigate that situation.
Yeah, to understand kind of like how they work relationally. But it's a real challenge. One of the big limitations of therapy is that in our kind of current Western conceptualization of what it is to help people, we kind of chop them off from their social system, we isolate them, and we speak to them individually. And there are naturally limitations in that process because we only get one person's perspective. Some of the ideas I've been interested in have been more from systemic and family therapy. And when I meet with someone individually, I still try and think of them in that way and ask questions as if other people are in the room, like what would X person say if they were here, or what do you think it's like for this person, to kind of cultivate that broader awareness. And it's quite surprising sometimes how often people say, oh, I actually don't know what they would say about that, or I don't know what that's like for them. So that process can be helpful in itself. But I think that, yeah, increasingly to manage these problems, we need to meet with more than one person or think about other ways to do this. But I mean, this has its, maybe we'll talk more about this, maybe not, but all of this has its roots in kind of neoliberalism and the Thatcher Reagan government based ideas about what society should be like in the West. And, you know, a lot of that was based on, you know, the dismantling of the community and the unions and all that sort of stuff. And it's all about the individual, and, you know, everyone gets a fair opportunity and you've got to make the most of it. Most of us intuitively know that that's not the case, but yeah, our therapy approach and the way that we individualize people in some ways is a reflection on that, which isn't to say that I never think it's useful. I guess this is one of those it depends things, because my job is to meet with people individually almost exclusively, and yet I also think that it's a limitation.
Surely you can have both. You can have those deep interactive conversations with a person to help them self-discover, but I guess what you're saying is that the end result has to involve more than just that conversation. There has to be an application into society. There has to be an integration of these ideas into society as well, whether it's the workplace, whether it's community settings, whatever. Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
I guess one of the good questions to ponder is, what is a good outcome in therapy? Like, is it if a person leaves therapy feeling empowered and as though they have a greater sense of themselves, I guess some would argue that in itself will have ramifications for the broader system in which they exist. And sometimes that can be one of the limitations of coming out of therapy, or, you know, the time in between, is that people are in an oppressive system. But I think that we should be seeing the outcomes of therapy as good if they also benefit the system around them. I know through my own experience of therapy that there were times where I felt more or less connected to my parents, more kind of annoyed about things that had happened. And actually that didn't feel like it was to the betterment of anything in my experience. And, you know, there was something about kind of nuance in that. I was speaking with somebody earlier today who said, you know, if everybody looks to better themselves, then how does that function in society? Like, maybe what we should be doing is trying to find peace, contentment, calmness.